The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, my name is Jillian Schaefer and I'm the Marketing Coordinator for SWK Technologies. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar, Year-End Processing and Closing Procedures in Sage 100 Workshop, presented by Marilyn Van Zwieten of SWK Technologies. A little housekeeping before we get started. Everyone has been placed on mute to keep the background noise down. However, you can submit any questions you have throughout the webinar. To submit a question, look for the question section in your GoToWebinar. We will answer all questions at the end of the presentation. We are recording this presentation and it will be distributed tomorrow to all attendees as well as to those who registered but were not able to attend. Please take a moment at the end of the presentation to answer our one survey question. With that said, we appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to attend our webinar. We're here to help you get the most out of your software solutions and help you find an easier way to run your business by providing you software and industry knowledge, tools, and support whenever you need it. So whether you're here doing research for a new solution or you're just here to learn, we'd like to encourage you to ask any questions throughout the webinar. Lastly, as a quick reminder, SWK is constantly sharing important updates and software tips and tricks on our social media channels, so we encourage you to follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Without further ado, I'll hand it over to Marilyn.
Okay, here we are. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. I have Sage 100 open and we are looking at version 2020 and it is the subscription version. Glad you could join us, and I think there's some exciting stuff about Sage 100 that hopefully I'll be able to share. That will be some new content for you. Every year, Sage or SWK has a webinar on year-end closing that goes through the procedures recommended by Sage software. The procedure is a very careful approach of the mechanics of the processing and some of the results of why it does it. We have a webinar from 2019 that's on our YouTube site, and I would recommend that you go there to check that out as a complement to this. I am going to try to go a little beyond the mechanics of the closing and share some of my opinions and observations after years of helping clients with Sage 100. We're going to focus on distribution and financial modules, and as I said, this is the most current module, most current version. Think of both period end and year end processing like you do maintaining your car. You change the oil to extend the life of the car, and you wash it for a better user experience. I'd like to think that maintaining your software does the same thing. You're going to get more out of the solution that you already own, and your staff is going to have a better experience inside of Sage 100. Most but not all modules require a period end processing, and the general rule of thumb is that you start at the bottom of your module list and work your way up. There are some exceptions, and there's a very nice slide in the 2019 webinar that goes through the order and shows you those exceptions. So something else that's important to realize is that when you do a period end processing, it is not running utilities on your data. It is not going to repair your data, but rather it is going to remove old data based on your module settings, and it's going to stop users from backdating transactions that impact reporting. If some of you have not been closing your periods and your years on a regular basis, there's a few more convenience things I'd like to share with you. First of all, when you run reports that are based on periods, and let's see if I can find one here real quick for you. We would let's look at our sales analysis or sales history report. It is going to default to the year that we're in. Others will default to the period. If you're constantly behind, you're constantly having to change that. I don't know about you, but I find that a little annoying. So if you change that, that's going to just create better conveniences. Another thing, when you go into account inquiry or account maintenance, if you're having to constantly change this fiscal year every time you come in to take a look at your transactions and your history, again, if you're up to date with your period end closing, that's not going to happen. There's another place that I think it is really helpful is when you go into item maintenance and you look at transactions, it defaults to the period that you are in when it focuses on the transactions. So if you are current, it's going to be putting your current period in there. So now, why these are not earth-shattering things, they do become a convenience things, and I think really help people appreciate some of the effectiveness of Sage 100. There's another feature that only really works if you are closing your periods regularly. Under the Preference tab, this is in Library Master, Company Maintenance, you can restrict the accounting date, and this is the date that you see down over in your status bar. You can restrict it from one for the current period and one future date. There's also something where you can restrict the document date. So let's say we're in December, and you know, I don't know about you, but between December and January, I start getting mixed up with the years. But if I say I can only go back on a document, meaning a check, an invoice date, something like that, I only have 2 periods where I can go prior and 1 period in the future. And this is just on the document date. This isn't going to prevent you from updating to something outside of that, but this certainly helps you. The other thing is there are some overrides in this in role maintenance that you might want to check out. Give these a try. They might give you a little better user experience, and maybe people won't be making so many of those 2020 versus 2021 mistakes in keying when we get into January. So hopefully that has convinced you, and also your attendance to this webinar has convinced you that it's a good thing to do. So we're going to start out with the purchase order module. Before we think about actually going to period end processing, let's talk about your history retention. We have this in almost every module, and here I have said that I am going to keep track of my item and vendor purchase history for 10 years. Now, we're going to find those options available in all the modules where you are able to set up history. And my personal opinion is that you would want to keep all of those similar, so that as a user is going back and forth between modules, they're looking back at historical information, they're going to have a consistent experience. So think about this. And another thing is when you do year-end processing, if my information from 11 years ago is now going to be purged. So the default on this is 2 years, so you definitely want to make sure that you take a peek at this. Now, what's the perfect retention period? Well, that's up to you. I see a lot of 10 years, a lot of 20 years. I do see some 99 years, but it's up to you on what you think is valuable for your business. There is something else that's important is the number of days to retain completed purchase orders. I have this set to 30 days. What that means is when I do period end processing or year end processing, if my purchase order has complete, it is going to remove it from the open purchase order file. It's saving it in history because I said under my history tab that I wanted to retain history, but it's going to make the size of that open file, I think, much more convenient. You can go up to 999 days, so whatever you think makes sense for you. The next thing that I think is important is actually looking at your purchase order file. If I come in here and I look at stuff and I see it super old, by the way, my test data is in year 2025, so yeah, it might look a little odd. But if I'm looking at stuff that's several years old, why is that there? Think about this. When I am in say I have this item, it's on order and I haven't received it yet. You can see here my quantity received is 0. Remember, this is actually impacting what I see in inventory. So that on purchase order quantity is going to be included in this summary information. If you're not paying attention to open purchase orders and open sales orders, this stuff really starts becoming somewhat meaningless. So instead of the system helping you, it's just full of stuff that you're not relying on. And again, it goes to that user experience. So hopefully I've convinced you that it's a good thing to be reviewing your purchase orders. Something else that I think is important, and this actually is located in the period end processing, and this is the purchases clearing report. This is a report showing the dollar value difference between inventory that you have received, but you have not yet received the invoice. At the bottom of this report, we have a total, and this total should reconcile to your general ledger. Now, there are a few things that will cause this not to reconcile. After you have received and you go back into the purchase order and change the unit cost, that new unit cost will show up here rather than the unit cost that you received it at. And so now we have something that doesn't reconcile until the purchase order is cleared out. Another thing that's a problem is if you do any receipts through inventory adjustments, because that's going to debit your inventory, it's going to credit the purchases clearing account, and it's not going to hit actually a purchase order. So some good things to look at. Another thing about this report that I think is really important is looking at your POs, things where the date of last receipt, if that's pretty long ago and your quantity received is not equal to your quantity invoice, you have some cleaning up to do. If you're running this report and it's 1,000 pages, and yes, I have actually seen that, well, you've got a lot of things to be cleaning up that is going to, first of all, it's going to close purchase orders that are sitting there waiting to be closed, and all of your open order reports are going to be much more meaningful and, of course, a lot shorter. So once we've run this and we're thinking and we have cleaned up our old purchase orders, and of course you don't have to wait for a period end to do that. You can just be doing that every week. Certainly, you don't, like I said, you don't have to wait till month end. One other thing that I should point out is that purchases clearing report is a contemporaneous report. That means that it is going to only run as of this moment. So you're going to look at your general ledger account as of this moment. We're not able to go back to a prior period. Hopefully, if it reconciles today, that meant it reconciled maybe, in our case, say maybe in November. And also, let's think about the timing of closing purchase order. In my opinion, it seems to make sense that after you've done your last receipt of goods for the month, it's time to close this module. You don't have to wait for the invoices because that's why we have a purchases clearing account that manages that. That's all happening up in your balance sheet. But you want your inventory to be accurate as of the end of the year. So let's get all of those receipt of goods recorded, and then we're ready to close. So that probably is happening 1 or 2 or maybe even the last day of the period. In all of our period end module or menus, we have a report selection. Now, your report selection, if you haven't modified this, probably has a pretty big list. One of the things that I see people doing is feeling that they have to run these reports. And what I think is that you run the reports that are meaningful to you. If your reports have custom settings, you could choose that custom setting rather than the standard. I have something set up for by item. If I want to add any more, I simply just add them, and we'll just do, say, a general ledger posting recap, and I will select my standard, and I can create multiple copies. If you don't want any reports, simply delete them all, and you won't run any report, and you don't need to run the reports. Coming to the period end processing, it's pretty simple. It's going to run my period end reports What I would recommend is that you set them up, if you are going to run a lot of them, set them up for Paperless Office. Let them be stored there rather than having to put them into a file cabinet or perhaps eventually being thrown out. Certainly, you don't want to store if you don't have to. I'm not going to run them, but I am going to just click on Proceed. The difference that this is between period end versus year end is that it is actually telling me up over here that both are going to happen. So it is also going to take away, remove any expired master orders and repeating orders. So think about that. I simply click on Proceed. It's alerting me, so of course I can change my mind. And here we go. And we're done. Now, I have test data, so this goes super quick. Yours might take a little bit longer, but for the most part, these modules don't take very long to run. If I would have had something in process, receipt of goods or something like that, it would have alerted me that there was something that needed to be posted. I think it makes sense to make sure that everything is closed up before I do my period end processing. Oh, one other tip that I want to tell you about is I have my period in December of 25, December 31st. If I'm going to run reports, I want to make sure that this is the same date as my period end date, because any reports that are looking for that choice of a period, it's going to default to this. And so I'm going to have a better user experience if I'm going to rely on those reports. Now that I've closed it, I do have to come in here, and if I want to begin working in the next year, I am going to have to move this manually. Okay, and now I'm in my next period. Let's move over to sales order. Again, what we want to look at in sales order is we want to look at our setup. We've looking at our setup options for our history, and here it's asking us how long we want to retain sales history. I'm choosing 10 because that's what I had chosen for purchase order. Something else you might notice that if I go to the main tab, unlike the purchase order module, I don't get to have the open sales orders that have been, well, they wouldn't be open, but the completed sales orders, they are not going to display in my open order file. There is no choice. Once it's completed, it drops off the file. So let's hop in over here to sales orders. Of course, we're going to want to look at our sales orders on a regular basis. Maybe it's not right at period end, but certainly through the month, you want to make sure that you are keeping up to date with all of your orders. Why hasn't something shipped? Is it never going to ship? Then let's remove it, because once again, we're looking at that information that inventory relies on, and we want to provide better user information for our inventory management and for purchase orders. Something I didn't mention when I was talking about old items, both in sales order and purchase order, we have some utilities. And all I could say is be super careful about these utilities. If I have super old information and I want to purge some of it, I can. But I strongly recommend that you put this into a test company. Try it out, try the different options that you have, see if the results is what you want. Once you're satisfied, then come in and do your purge in here. And like I said, that's both in purchase order and sales order. So something else that will, in sales orders, if you have when you do your year-end processing and period-end processing, if you have expired sales quotes, those may go. So you want to make sure that if you have expiration dates, that you're being careful about looking at those expiration dates. We'll come over to period end, and you'll notice that there are no other tasks that Sage is recommending, so they haven't collected anything here. If we look at our reports, you certainly want to come in here and choose the reports that are going to be meaningful to you. And then we'll come in and we'll do period end processing, and you'll see that this is just like the purchase order module. Now, when does it make sense to close your period in sales order. In my opinion, when you update your last shipment of the year, that's when you close your sales order module. One of the things that you don't have to do is you don't have to close any of these modules at the same time. The important thing is that you're starting at the bottom of our list and working your way up. Okay, let's check out inventory. Now, here's a trick question. Where am I going to find my history? Because when I come into setup and I go to inventory options, there is no history tab here. Well, it's just like that little pop quiz, that trick question. It's sitting over here in common information under setup, common information options, and here's the number of years to retain my item history. Why is it here? Because this also impacts the number of years you are saving miscellaneous charges and items that you use in sales order, purchase order, accounts receivable, and actually some of the other modules. So I know sometimes it's hard to figure out where that's at, right? So I think that there's a lot of things that really have to happen when you are doing your inventory, taking care of inventory. Of course, you've got to think about your physical counts. When are you going to do that? If you're going to do that in the current period, you're not going to want to close your period until your physical count is done. And for those of you that don't do a physical count, there's something that I think actually is pretty helpful to do. And if you simply come to the Explorer menu, I set something up here in Item Quantities by Warehouse View. And I have set a report to look at for all of the negative quantity on hand. If I have negative quantities, I obviously have a problem somewhere. Either I didn't receive on a purchase order or I received the wrong purchase order, and maybe there's an offset in there if I have items that are very common. So one of the things that I can do to improve my inventory, and by the way, with negative quantities, you can see down at the bottom over here, I have $163,000 worth of negative inventory. That means my inventory is understated by $163,000. Now, how do you fix these? Well, you're going to have to do an inventory adjustment, or you're going to have to do a receipt of a purchase order, right? If you have failed to do one. And there's also a little way that you can go into physical inventory and have a way of getting all of the negative quantities on hands to be reset to 0. So once we're done with that, by the way, if you're not aware of how to use this, I just want to point out that we have export options, and then you can send this over to Excel. It comes over perfect, and that way you have a little worksheet to take care of your obvious errors within inventory. So when we come to the period end menu, we have a negative tier report. This is going to be something useful for those of you that are using FIFO, where you have layers. If I look at this negative tier report, it is going to show me every time I have shipped something, creating a negative quantity on hand. And as we know with FIFO, or even LIFO, it has to relieve a layer, right? Well, if I have no quantity on hand, it doesn't know what to do, so it creates a tier called over-distributed. This is going to stay here until you receive in a positive quantity in a different tier, okay? And by the way, you might have noticed that some of these are the same items that were negative on my negative quantities report. When I come to my negative tier adjustment, this is going to go through and adjust the negative tier with the positive tier. Now, in my report, I didn't have any positive tiers, so I'm not going to run this. But just remember that this can also create a little bit of a general ledger transaction if that that over tier has a different dollar value from your positive tiers. So if you find that this report is super long, copy everything over into a test company, try it out, make sure you're not getting something unexpected. So with our inventory, of course, we're not going to want to close it until all of our sales orders, all of our purchase orders have been updated, all of our inventory adjustments, and same with our physical counts. You're going to want to make sure all of that has been taken care of. And let's come to our report selection. You can run all these reports, but one of the things that I want to point out is the inventory valuation report. This is a report as of right now. This is for this moment. So let's say I'm in January 15th. Lots of activity has been going on, right? This report is only going to show me what's going on as of January 15th. There is an inventory valuation by period report that you might want to consider running instead of this. In my opinion, you would have run most of these reports before you even came to the task of period end processing. But choose reports that are meaningful to you. And remember, and the stock status report, this is one that shows quantity on hand, quantity on sales order, quantity on purchase order. Well, if your sales order and purchase orders are a mess, well, this isn't going to do you much good, is it? So I encourage you to take a look at these reports, keep your data clean, and have these reports be more meaningful to you. And we're simply going to come into period end processing here. I'm not going to go through printing all of the reports. We click on proceed, and here we go. And I'm now in the new period. Okay, accounts receivable is next. That is one of the exceptions. You actually close accounts receivable based on the recommendations of SAGE before you do accounts payable. But before we pop over to accounts receivable, I want to point something out in accounts payable that I think is actually pretty nifty. There is a way to link a vendor and a customer. So let's take a look to see what I have open here. I have Avnet as a customer and I have Avnet as a vendor. By creating this link, there is a procedure in period end where I can take the invoices from that customer and put them onto the vendor. So instead of me paying them and them paying me, I can combine the two. If I come over to Avnet, I believe I have one already set up. Let me go take a quick little peek. And what has happened over here, this is from my AR where I took over an invoice for $935 and I brought it over here to reduce my balance. So now if there is something left for me to pay, and in this case, I'm going to include that on my remittance advice. Of course, you're going to have to make sure you're working with your customer to make sure it works for him. On the customer side of things, let's go take a quick little peek at the customer. You'll see here, and let's see, I think it's this one right here. Yeah, it is. This one only had a partial balance, and you can see that the payment reference is clearing. This can be super handy when you are, instead of having to, like I said, swap checks or write everything off to a clearing account, this allows you to create that really nice link. Give that a try. See what you think if you have that situation. Now, before we move to period end, we're going to take a look at our AR options. We're going to look at our history. And again, I have some consistency here. And another thing I'm going to look at is the time that I'm going to retain paid invoices in the open invoice file. The open invoice file is what you see when you're in customer maintenance and you're looking at that list box. Now, that doesn't mean that the invoices, once they've been paid and the retention period is gone, that they disappear from history. If you click on the More button, you're going to see them in history. You know what, let me make sure that I'm making sense. Not everybody is aware of the More button, so let me just pop in here and find a customer real quick. So this represents here, this list box, this represents the open invoices, even though, like this invoice here, you can see that it's been paid. If I come up over here and I look at my invoice inquiry, this is, you'll see here that it says invoice history inquiry. This will be all of the invoices based on your retention. So again, let's come back to our period end processing, and this is where, my options. This is where your screen might look a little bit different from mine. This, I believe, is only available if you are on subscription, and this is a fairly new feature. So if you're not seeing this, you're seeing number of days, and you can go up to 999 days. Here I can actually go up to 9,999 months. And here, remove paid invoices. This is actually kind of nice. You get to choose, do I want to do this at each period end or only at year end? I think that's kind of a nifty little option, whatever makes the most sense for you. Before you go to your period end processing, one of the reports that I would run would be my accounts receivable trial balance report. I want to make sure that this agrees with my general ledger. Now, if I'm right at period end, and here, let's just go to the very end of this. This is what my invoice or my accounts receivable balance should be in general ledger. Now, I like to run that rather than the aging report. The aging report, when you're right at period end, really does a pretty good job, but occasionally you will find that the trial balance is the one that you can most rely on because it's looking at the transactional file rather than the open invoice file. So this is what I use for reconciliation. Of course, aging is really meant more for collection and to see what type of reserves you need to be having. So let's move on to our period end, and we've got a bunch of stuff in here. Okay, first of all, if you are charging finance charges, this is where you're going to calculate it. I think it makes sense to do it at month end, and you have some nice option here. If, let's say I'm not going to charge it if they owe less than $100, and I'm not going to charge less than $1. When I proceed with this, I'm going to get a little report that is going to calculate that period, what the amounts are, because it's going to actually put like an invoice onto the customer's account. So here we go. Here we've got some finance charges, and if I agree with this, I could just move on and update the finance charges, but I'm going to say no, because I found something that I wanted to change. So I can come into the entry here, and let's go look at one of these big ones, like maybe ABF. Maybe I've decided that I'm only going to charge them $100. I can go in, I can get that changed, and then now I can come in and do my finance charge journal. Okay, we could see this, and we should be able to see my $100 instead of the calculated amount. So let's go ahead and exit out of here, and I'm going to update. This is going to create a journal because it is increasing receivables, and it is charging my whatever account that I have chosen for my finance charges. Now, normally, quite frankly, I send all of this stuff to Paperless Office. I just wanted to, it comes up easier on a preview when I'm doing a presentation like this, but all of this stuff I would be sending to Paperless Office. And of course, I would have to be clicking the print button instead of the preview button for it to go to Paperless Office. Okay, so we've got that taken care of. And if we go into one of our customers, let's go see if we could take a peek. And let's see, I believe we had something for them. And let's come in, and here is our finance charge, and here's our $100. Now, here's a little thing. You might end up sending a statement, and your customer might get a little fussy about the fact that you charge them finance charges. You can adjust these. If you go into invoice data entry in accounts receivable, and if you type in this invoice number dash FC for finance charge, you can it'll walk you through adjusting that entry to 0. So that you can also change the amount of finance charges. Maybe he agrees to pay $50, and you want to be able to adjust that and have that show on a statement. There is nothing to print. When you do something like this, notice that there's no drill down, so I can't print a document for that finance charge. Okay, let's keep going down our list. Next, we have statement printing. Just a few reminders about statement printing. I'm not going to actually print them, but I do want to point out that of course, you can customize these. You have these lovely messages here that may help with giving the message that you want. And one of the things that I like to do is I like to set this for a category other than current. So I might want to say, I only want to send this for people that are 60 days out, or maybe it's only 30 days. But this is another perfect use for Paperless Office. If I click on print and I have those customers set up on paperless delivery, instead of having to stuff envelopes, they're going to go to my customers via email. And I find that this is really very effective for collections, just that little nudge that sometimes your customers might need. There's something else in here that I think is helpful. We have a commission edit. If you are working with a commission and you are relying on the reports, let's say we come to this particular credit memo and it's taking away a commission amount. I can either change my sales or my cost of sales, and maybe I'll go to an invoice. It might make a little bit more sense. I could change my cost subject to commission. So let's say maybe that cost should have been $10, and then I can recalculate it by clicking on the epsilon if and see I have no commission rate on this one. But let's say I have 10%, should recalculate my commissions, and there we go. So this way, if a report is printing out incorrectly that you're sharing with your salesperson, you can come in here and make those changes so the report will now be something that is usable and something that your salesperson will rely on. If I click on accept, the next thing I'd have to do is come down here and run the register. Even if you are not creating accruals with your commissions, you want to run the register because that's what actually updates the salesperson reports. Okay, there's one more nifty little thing here. It is matching credit memos to open invoices. I don't know if you've ever looked at this, but this could be something lovely or something that it's like, maybe you don't want to try this. Definitely try this in a test company first. First, you could take the credits and you could sequentially, based on invoice number, apply them, or you could do it on invoice date. So it's going to take the oldest and then work its way forward until the credit memos are all used up. The only thing is you really don't get a choice here on being able to select the invoices that are being applied. But sometimes this can be handy, and notice that you can just do it for one customer. If you have a customer with just a ton of stuff and that's your agreement, then give this a try, and I think that you'll like that. Okay, we've got period end reports again. We're going to look at these. We're only going to choose the ones that we are actually going to use. Here I have salespersons. Well, if I'm not if I don't have salespeople, I'm going to get rid of that. If I don't find the analysis report, I'm just going to delete it. I don't pay commissions, so I'm not going to worry about this. And just keep the ones that you want. Now, here's something that you can do. Watch this. I will just delete all of them because I personally am in the habit when I was using this for my business is that I made sure I ran all those reports and agreed with the reports before I came to period end processing. Now, something that's different when I come into period end processing because I have no reports, look, it has just taken this away. So now if I really don't want to print those reports, I won't make the mistake of not unchecking that. So we're going to click on proceed. We have the same thing that's happening. It's changing our periods. And there we go. And we'll move on to accounts payable. So accounts payable, again, we're going to look at our history retention, making sure that it's what we want. And here's my history. I'm doing 10 years with all of my modules. And then I am also saying how long I want to retain paid invoices. Remember, it's in the open invoice file. It's not in history altogether. And I've chosen this one to be a little different from accounts receivable. Of course, you choose whatever makes the most sense, and you will find this to be days if you are on an older version of Sage or if you are not on subscription. Give those a try. Check them out, see if you like them. You might not, make sure, especially this year, and especially if you've had an upgrade recently, you want to make sure that you check all of that history retention. Again, we have some reports. I think it's important to run your trial balance report. I'm not going to run it here, but you're going to want to make sure that your trial balance report agrees with your general ledger. You're also going to take a look at your open invoices. First of all, have you paid for invoices on a credit card? There is functionality inside of Sage where you can specify a vendor that is your credit card, and there's a way of moving invoices from your other vendors to that vendor. It shows as being paid on the original vendor, and now when you get the statement and you pay the statement, you're now paying it to the credit card vendor. Here's another thing to think about is, are all those invoices that you have on your vendor files, and you know what, actually I'll just run an aging report real quick right here. Well, we'll just take a quick little peek at this. So I'm surprised at how often I work with clients that will say to me, oh yeah, you know what, that's super old, but we're never going to pay it. Well, if you're never going to pay it, you want to write it off. But perhaps it's not quite so obvious how you write something like this off. If I want to zero this out, what I'm going to do is go into invoice data entry in accounts payable, type in the invoice number and the vendor number exactly as it is here, and it will prompt you and say, hey, it already exists. Do you want to adjust? And you simply say yes, and you adjust for the amount. And then, of course, you have an opportunity to spread it to the appropriate general ledger expenses. So you'll definitely want to get rid of those. Another thing that I see that sometimes people aren't aware of is, let's say they have a vendor. They haven't worked with a vendor for years, and there's a debit and there's a credit on the account. How do you get rid of something like that? It's not very apparent where you do that, but if you come into manual check entry, and if you start off your check number with APP, and I'm just going to go 333, what happens is you'll notice that the check amount is 0. I would find my vendor, I'd go to lines, and I would pick that debit and the credit, and when I update that, it will remove that net result of 0. So I know some of you have probably tried to just create a check for like a penny or something like this, but this is some nice functionality that's not very apparent. Okay, let's also talk about 1099s. 2 weeks ago, we had a wonderful webinar on payroll and 1099s. And what we'll do is we could send you a link for that webinar if you haven't seen it, and it will go into detail of 1099s. What's really important is the 1099s have changed. So this is where you're going to launch it. I always think it's odd that it's not in period end processing, right? Doesn't it seem to be where you would do something like that? For year 2020, you need to start using 1099 NEC. That also has a minimum reporting requirement of $600. And then you can run through your processing here using Atrix. This is a service that's embedded in your Sage 100. There is a little, I'm going to call it like an applet that has to be installed on your workstation for this to run, but it's included with your subscription or your perpetual license. And then when you run through the process, it allows you to either electronically file those forms or it allows you to print to plain paper. But let me just show you real quick, just in case you aren't aware of how to change something like the 1099s. We're going to go into my Airway Properties. Airway Properties, this is a rental, so I have kept him. This really should be a miscellaneous, okay, because this is rental property. If I come in here, take a look at my amounts here, I have for my form miscellaneous, I have my $25,000. If I come to my next client, my next vendor, this is non-employee compensation. And I'm going to go to box 1 to put his information in. If he was set up under miscellaneous, I would have to zero that out and bring it in over to this one. And of course, you can see how I can manually do this. If you come to vendor maintenance and find that you don't have that little button, that means your role needs to be modified so that you can take advantage of modifying these numbers. Now, there's also utility available that can be used, and I believe that is covered in that webinar that we had. So again, I encourage you to take a look. It's posted up on our YouTube channel, and we can also send you a link if you would find that helpful. Now, when do you close AP? Well, I feel like whenever it is that you feel that you have received all of your invoices for the year, we're going to go and close AP. AP might be a little longer than accounts receivable. It certainly is going to be longer than sales order and purchase order and inventory. But here's another thing to think about. If you're using the bank reconciliation module in Sage 100, which by the way I think is quite wonderful, you will want to hold open AP and AR and of course general ledger until you have reconciled your bank. What if you missed a deposit? What if somehow you had a manual check that you hand wrote and you didn't do inside Sage and then you see it? Well, it makes it so much easier to go in and be able to put in your transaction, get it to the bank reconciliation module in the appropriate way. So let's pop over to our period end and see what's waiting for us there. You'll notice that we have the AP to AR. We've already talked about that. And we're going to come up to our period end. We're going to choose the reports that are meaningful. And then we're simply going to run period end processing. This one's going to have a little different, prompt that's a little different. When I run this, it's going to ask me, let's go ahead and do this. And it didn't do it. Now, I must have done something wrong. In my setup, if I am using 1099s, it should prompt me to move to the next 1099 year. And it could be because I haven't run them yet. And certainly when you go to print them, it will ask you if you want to make your default into the new year. So just be aware of that. Okay, let's move over to general ledger. Boy, there's a lot of stuff in general ledger to think about. You know, you have to reconcile your accounts. You want to have your cash, AR, AP, inventory, fixed assets, all of your loan accounts and all of your accrual accounts. You're going to want to make sure that you have those reconciled. There are a couple nice things, say, in account maintenance that can help you with that. Let's just come over to an account that has a lot of history in here. Sometimes it's helpful to know that you can export this screen here to Excel. It comes over perfectly. Also, when I'm in the Transactions tab, if I want to send this over to Excel, if I click on my little Excel button over here, it will then export this list to Excel. Oops, and here I did click it. As you can see, it comes over perfectly. This is a new feature, by the way, in 2020, so your older versions won't have it for transactions, but it will for the history. So that might make things a little more convenient as you're doing your reconciliations. Something else that I think helps is before you close, if you're not using an outside accountant, we have some nice reports in our financial statements, but one of them that I think is really critical to think about before you close your year is setting up an income trend. You do that just by clicking on this little new financial report and going through there's a little wizard that takes you through this. And what I like about looking at this report is that it is going to give me a side-by-side comparison, and I can look for anomalies. Like how come in May this is so big where it's so small in other months? Did I start posting something to the wrong place? Or, if I'm looking at my expense accounts, they should be rather smooth, or I would think that they would be smooth. If they're not, what's changed? So it's not always apparent that that report is there, because if you look at these three standard, this is what standard is there. But go through this little wizard, try them out. There's a ton of great stuff in here and simple to set up, and you can't ruin anything. So don't be afraid to go through here. So before you close your year, you're also going to want to see if you have any recurring journal entries. You're going to run your journals. Of course, you're going to finish up. And notice that we have allocation entries. Allocation entries are where you can take the balance of an account, and such as this account here, and then I can spread it to other accounts, in this particular example, based on percentages. Handy when you're using say, departments, and you don't want to have to spread all of these expenses during your entry of invoices. So when we go and look at our period end, we're going to see this is when Sage is recommending that you run the allocations. In my opinion, you would run this probably long before you got to your period end, certainly after you've done most of your reconciliations, but you're going to run those. And then I think it makes sense taking a look at the general ledger detail report. I'm actually going to back this up into May where I have more information. It might look a little bit, make a little more sense. Print this condensed. I think this is a much better format. The other one just takes up so much paper. But this one will take care of it in a portrait view, which I think is handy. Review all of this stuff. Does it look like the entries are in the account where it makes sense? Do we have something to ComEd that maybe it went to a cost of goods sold account? Maybe we want to make changes of those, and adjust those before we close our period. So once we've reconciled, we're going to think about, and we're ready to close, there's some budgets to consider. Do we want to copy some of our budgets or our activity into the new year? Tomorrow we are having a webinar solely on this functionality of the budget features you already own. So if you're somebody that wants to explore this, or even if you're experienced, there's a lot of functionality in here that isn't very apparent, and I would encourage you to sign up for that and make that as part of your year-end closing. So we've updated budgets, we've updated our recurring entries, we've updated our allocations, we've done all of our recommendations, and now it's time for us to go ahead and run our reports. Again, we have report selections. Make the reports the ones that make sense to you. And then we're going to do our period end processing. And I'm not going to do the reports. Again, if I was going to do the reports, I would be sending them to Paperless Office. And I simply proceed. It's warning me I didn't do the allocations, but I'm going to say yes, that I want to continue, and it's showing me my new period. So you can see a lot is going on. There's a lot to take care of. I think that if you take the time to make sure that your data is meaningful, that you're cleaning up old documents, that you're keeping up to date with your period end processing, and you know what your history retention is, and especially once you know what the retention is, maybe it's not so scary to do those year-end and period end processings. I think you're going to have a much better user experience inside of Sage, and especially with that inventory module. If you're keeping purchase orders and sales orders cleaned up, you're going to find that you really have a system that is working for you. So with that, hopefully I've convinced you that you will want to do these things on a timely basis, and you're going to be in the habit of keeping track of your Sage and making it in the best shape possible. Hopefully you found this information useful, and with that, I'm going to turn it back to Jolene to close up the webinar and also to see if there's any questions.
Thanks, Marilyn. We'll now open it up for questions. If you have any questions, please enter them into the questions section of your GoToWebinar. We'll give that a minute in case any more come through. And just to remind everyone, we do have a subject matter expert here. This is a great opportunity to have your questions answered in real time. We do have a couple that came through during the presentation, Marilyn. The first being,
Okay.
Is there any way to open a period to post to after it's closed?
I love that question, and you know, I should have commented on that. I hesitate to tell you to recommend that you do this for any other module except for General Ledger, but let me show you what happens. If I come in here in General Ledger options, look what I can do. Now I can post journal entries back in year 2025, and I'm not restricted to 2026. Can you do it with the other modules? Yes, you can, and part of me says, oh, don't do that because of the way that Sage used to store data, and this is showing my age with Sage. It used to be that was a really bad idea. In these more modern versions of Sage, it actually doesn't really hurt anything. So, but like I said, I'm in the habit of only doing that with General Ledger. Hopefully that answered your question.
We have another. How do you set up GL calendar for the new year?
Oh, that is a great question too. The interesting thing is, as soon as you do that first journal entry that impacts the new year, it's all opened up. However, maybe you want to work on budgets. If I come in here into fiscal year maintenance and I accept this, and well, if I do 2026, you'll see that it's already there, but I can do 2027. And now once I accept this, it has opened up the 2027.
And we have another. Where can we go to find more information on 1099 processing procedures? So we held a webinar on 1099 processing procedures in Sage 100 2 weeks ago, as Marilyn mentioned, so I can send the recording along with today's recording by end of day tomorrow. And that looks like all the questions we have, Marilyn, so give me a minute as I take back the screen control. Perfect. Thank you so much, Marilyn, for your informative presentation and for taking the time to be here today. And thank you everyone for attending our webinar. Have a wonderful rest of your day.